You remember Punk Hobbs? Yeah, that great pitcher in grade school that stood on the mound and controlled all of us. Do you remember Max, the catcher? Do you remember Dennis, the first baseman? Do you remember Stuart Nash, the second baseman? Do you remember Donnie at shortstop? And third base was mine. Do you remember how I got my new mitt? By going without food for, or not food, but going without lunch for 4 months. My dad helping me out by doubling the amount that I had. Do you remember how the other team members loved my mitt? All the wonderful things that I felt at that time. Well, it's 2 years later now, and I'm a sophomore, and now I'm living in American Fork, Utah. Actually, I live in Highland, but the school was in American Fork. We were cavemen. Seemed rather odd to me at the time, but it grew on me. I loved being a caveman. Well, the time came for, I was a sophomore and I wanted to be on the sophomore baseball team. And tryouts were next week. So I practiced and practiced as much as I could, playing catch and hitting and all of those things. And the time finally came and I went out there just nervous as all get out because this was a lot bigger school than the one that I was used to. And we had our tryouts. The coaches were there. All the people that wanted to try out were there. We were on a regular baseball diamond that had grass and a backstop, and the infield was groomed by a tractor with a grader on it, and the bases were beautiful bases that you bought that were really actually bases. And the home base was, it looked like a home base, looked like it should look. I was in awe. I was just awestruck. Well, they started off by all of us being out in the field, and they'd shoot or hit fly balls to us. A couple of them came to me, and I went over and shagged it and threw it in. And then pretty soon they divided us up, and some of us were doing one thing and another. And I remember the first thing that I did is they were hitting grounders to us, and I decided, man, I've got to play like Punk Hobbs is in charge, because that grounder is coming right to me, and I've got to get it no matter what. So they'd knock a grounder to me, and I'd go over there and just literally, it couldn't have gotten past me. It would have hit me right in the head maybe, but it wouldn't get past me. Anyway, I did everything that I thought I could. And when I got through it that week, I thought to myself, do I have a chance? I don't know how many there were out there trying out for a sophomore team. It was more than a tryout for the sophomore team. It was the whole high school, but the sophomore team was the one that I would have been put on and that I was trying so hard for. And anyway, I thought, did I do pretty good? And I thought to myself, it seemed like I did all right. I think I stood up for myself a little bit. I think I might have done pretty good. So it was the teams were going to be put out on the window of the coach's office out in the hall area. And so we could go there on Saturday if we wanted to, and just to see who made the teams. So Saturday came along, and I went down to the school and walked in there, and man, it was crowded. Boy, there's players standing all over the place. You couldn't even get into it. And I saw the roster hanging on the window of the coach's office, and I made my way up to it, and I went down through the roster, and I thought, wow, my name's not there. And I went through it again. It's not there. Oh, I felt horrible. And this time I decided to go through it really carefully because, sometimes people misspell Abe. So I went down through it very, very carefully, and my name was not there. And I turned, started walking off. Next thing I knew, somebody went past me really in a big hurry trying to get somewhere. And they said, "Way to go, Dally." I said, "What do you mean? Was that just a joke or what?" And I got to the door and I opened the door, and in came a guy headed for the back end of the school. He'd already been there. He said, "Way to go, Dally, you made the bigs." And I didn't know what the heck the bigs meant. I'd fed the pigs before, but making the bigs, I didn't know what that meant. And I thought, I wonder what the heck he means. So I decided to go back in. I went back in and started milling around with everybody. And then I realized there were some people going down the little sub hall. And on that window, there was another roster. And so I went over there and looked at it and said, "Oh no, that's the varsity roster." And I looked at it, and I'll be darned if my name wasn't on the varsity roster. I had made the varsity. For just a second there, I became proud and haughty and high-minded. Excuse me, that was horrible. It was anything but what you should have received from me. Anyway, I didn't know what to think. But in a couple of days, it was Monday, and we went there and we had a meeting, and all those that made the team, and the coaches congratulated me and said that I deserved to be on their varsity team. And oh man, my socks even looked better than they did the day before. I couldn't believe it. Well, anyway, we went out and practiced a couple of days, and then the coach came to me and he said, "Dally, for all of the juniors and seniors, they have seventh period PE. Now you don't have seventh period PE, so you need to get some things changed around so that you can have seventh period as your PE time, because we want to start practicing during seventh period." And I said, "Well, what if they won't?" He said, "Oh, they will. No problem. We've never had a problem with that." And I thought, well, that's great. So I went down to the seminary because that was my seventh period. And I walked in and I saw Mr. Christensen, who was the principal. I told him my situation, and he looked at the class I was in, and it happened to be his. Too bad he had to look to see. But anyway, he looked at it and he says, "I'm sorry, Abe, we can't change." I said, "Really?" He said, "That's right." He says, "You can cancel it and leave it. But in Idaho, when you lived there, they didn't have seminary. And so you wouldn't be able to graduate with your class when it come time to graduate from seminary. And there's no other time to have that class." And I thought, no, 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 there's got to be another way. And I walked out of there with my head hanging down by my toenails, snipping them with my front teeth. And I went home and I went out to Dad. Dad was getting ready to plant spuds, and I walked out to him and I said, "Dad, I got a problem." He said, "What's your problem, son?" And I told him the story and told him that they said they didn't have any other class that would take its place. In order to graduate, I have to have it. He said, "Boy, you got a problem, haven't you?" I said, "Yes." "Can you help me?" And he said, that's a problem that you got to solve yourself. If he already told you that you can't, then you better go back and talk to him and see and plead and see if there's another. It wouldn't do much good for me to go in. So I thought, oh, brother, where are the adults? Where are the people that can help me? So I went down there and I talked to him about it again. And he said, Abe, honestly, if I could do something, I would. So then I went to the coach and I said, Coach, is there any way we can have practices after? And no, Abe, we can't do it that way. Is there just too many people counting on that? And I told him my problem, and he says, he talked to me about it. He said, well, keep trying. It'll work out. I know it will. Well, I tried for a week. Meanwhile, I wasn't going to my seminary class because it started in seventh period. And I went back to my dad, and Dad says, you got a real serious problem. He said, it'll be interesting to see how you work that out. And that night, I knew I had to make a decision by the next day. That night, I tossed and turned and knelt down and prayed and prayed and prayed that there'd be a way that I'd be able to play baseball. And I'd go back to bed and I'd toss and turn and kneel down and pray again. All night long, I did that. Finally, I knew what I should do. So the next morning, I got up and I did my chores and I had my breakfast. And I walked out and got on the school bus and went to school. Walked over to the gym, went into my locker, got my uniform, and walked into the coach's office. And I said, well, Coach, it's been nice, but here's your uniform back. He said, Dally, you don't need to have that class to graduate. He was talking about high school. And I says, I do, Coach. I do, as I walked out. That was the last time I played organized baseball. And you know what? I really didn't miss it. I really didn't miss it. I made up the difference by playing church ball. I used to have really, really competitive church base or softball at that time. And I was a softball pitcher and I enjoyed it very much. I know that it would have been a good thing for me to have been a baseball player. I think I could have learned a lot of things, but not as much as I did by going to seminary. I loved seminary. I loved what I was learning there. And I knew from the home evenings that we'd had. We had home evenings before the church even started the home evening program. My parents had what they called, what do they call it? Scripture hour or something. I don't remember. It was something hour. And so I was aware enough to know when we were studying in seminary that we that what we were getting in seminary was far more important than what I would have gained on the baseball field. I had a lot of opportunities to play other sports. I loved sports, and I hated to miss baseball because baseball meant everything to me at that time. And I gave it up for seminary. And I know because of that experience, the experience of a 15-year-old kid, that 15-year-olds can make really important decisions as well. Doesn't have to be an adult. It was important. It was important to my training and my upbringing. And it was important to the way I taught my children. So I hope that all of you listening will know that there is nothing more important when you're in school. There's a lot of important classes and activities, but none of them are more important than seminary. So make sure that you inculcate that into your life's experience